Alright, so I think it's working. It's day 7 of quarantine.
I've run out of food. And now dirt.
Right. Alright, I'm starting. So this week's presentation is on the chapter of Concretizing Simondon, and Constructivism. I have no idea how it's pronounced. So let's just get cracking. So the broad goal overall of this chapter, the author states, is before the last 50 years, empirical research dominated standard notions of truth and progress. And so the problem becomes, how do we emancipate ourselves from this scientific, technical progress? And so, according to Simondon, progress it shifts to it shifts from the typical view of what progress is, which is efficiency and productivity, to a principle of technical progress, quote, in the nature of technology itself rather than in its relation to society. So this, as the author states, is it's the space that Marcuse left. It's the ambiguous interpretation of Marcuse for hope in this context of being able to grow and use technology for something more than just efficiency and progress, and be doomed to his technological rationality, as he puts it. So after this typical definition of progress shifts, progress can now dominate empirical research. So it flips. That was kind of my question. So according to Simondon, he argues that we must, quote, better integrate technology with human beings and nature. So that's our goal of the chapter, essentially. It's that's the broad project, is that he's going to walk us through the various steps that he takes in order to better harmonize technology and humans rather than set them in opposition to each other, so that we can better integrate and develop political and social philosophies based upon this. And so the next section is Constructivism and the question of progress. Now, social movements, according to this section, and technology are citizen-based nowadays, not government-based, which, if you think about it, is really logical. Not logical, but rational, just in the sense that we understand, or we can use technology in order to further things that we want. It doesn't have to be government mandated. So the dark web was an example that he gives, environmentalist movements, things that are led by people, not necessarily dictated by the government. So this means that the sociology of technology and philosophy must alter, quoted in the book. So my question is, how? And then the author switches over to Marcuse on technological citizenship. So there's two different technological forms of citizenship, broadly, according to him, which is technological rationality and this new form of rationality. Now, the technological rationality is what we experienced in Marcuse and, I want to say, Horkheimer and Adorno, where it's the domination rationality, in which we use technology as a means of manipulation and control and domination towards everything else that's in existence. And then that has created this kind of whirlpool cycle in which this rationality exists on its own. So this different rationality that he's suggesting is a rationality that realizes the potentialities of objects themselves. And what that means is, when we talk about the objects themselves, we talk about human beings and natural systems that grow and develop. And so, because of the fact that we talk about the objects and we realize them as developing things, this is something that's ignored by technological rationality. And so, when we recognize this, we want to. It's like a little win, like a little dig. And so it's how can we take this further? What do we do now that we know that technological rationality ignores this dynamic? How do we take advantage of the dynamic? And the answer is it helps us to converge environmental movements, social movements, so social movements, stuff like that, with this rationality, with each other. Essentially, so it merges the two. The technological expression of human beings in the world would be the manifestation of societal things such as this environmental movement. So then the question becomes, how do we join this social movement and constructivist approaches? And to overcome the problem, there has to be no divide between modernity and like the earlier times, no stark difference, which a lot of people apparently, a lot of scholars like to just kind of throw off and not pay much attention to. So the answer of how we do this is in the ATS, or the actor something system. ATS. Oh, never mind. That was ANT, Actor Network System. Sorry, ATS, which is I forget, but let's move on. So the answer is this ATS, which I want to say is like actor something system. It's not only the actors understanding the artifacts themselves, so like the objects of our knowledge, which would be like anything technological essentially. As contingent, this is a quote, not only is actors' understanding of the artifacts they use contingent, their contingent views shape the technological future. And so this contingency in which we operate and we formate and we restructure is the very process by which like this rationality takes place, and we're able to embody this rationality of social movements in this contingency and create our own future technologically, and our technological future technologically. So humans and non-humans are now under this rationality, bound as one into, quote, assemblages, and now include natural and technical phenomena. So problems arise, obviously, in like the previously existing problems, such as like there's no political theory still posited, and there's like contradictions that exist within this. So that moves us on to like concretization, which is going to be Feenberg's, basically his hope for us. And what concretization is like, it's a focus for Feenberg and for Simondon as like on technicity rather than utility. And so what that means is that technology or technicity refers to the essential nature of technique. So it's like a technical mentality engaged with the intrinsic logic of technique. So it manifests in every technical device and system and has shaped modern culture. So Simondon adds to this and like develops it as a development of technology and the reconciliation of human beings and the machine. So basically he's saying stop focusing on the utility of the technology and focus just on the machines themselves and the social milieus that like are created within this manifestation of technological devices separate from our human needs. And so I'm going to get ahead of myself really quick. This is precisely what makes scholars look at Simondon and classify him as a determinist, because of the fact that he wants us to identify these structures and these technologies separate from us. It's almost like this imposition of the technological rationality and structures upon us post their development and their formation. And so that would be a deterministic approach in the sense that we don't have any free will or part to play in other than being and operating at the affect of these structures. And so to move on from there, from this focus on the technicity rather than the utility, the reason why is concretization. It's concretization is why he wants to focus on this technicity. And so concretization, according to him, is basically, we talked about this in class a few weeks ago, it's the development of multiple functions of a piece of object or technology into one thing. So it's actually like a complication of the object, and so things are much less simple, but it's also like develops these, like it operates under these laws, all right, that form this concretization and the way in which certain things form in certain ways. And the laws that dictate this are the same laws that create the, quote, technical individual, which is us and how we exist in our society. There's a quote on page 72. It says, a single structure with several functions replaces separate structures, each fulfilling a single function. So my response to that is that critical constructivism gets a new idea of technical progress. And if you remember, like, the whole goal of this is to like reevaluate our means of technical progress as such and how it happens, because that's where like the how in all of this is how we're going to get out of it, and or how we're going to like develop through this. We're identifying the progress from the beginning. And so we start to realize that like through this process, social progress is then mediated by this technology. Technology forms in a specific milieu. So essentially what it's talking about is that like technologies are not independent necessarily. They all form in this backdrop of the time and place in which we exist. So like a house is built in a specific place because of specific things, such as the sun beating down on it, or like whatever it may be. So then we move on to this process of individuation, which immediately brings me to like, it makes me want to think of Heidegger and like historicism and Merleau-Ponty, and I think that he mentions both of those people, where it just basically talks about how we're bound up in this like dialectical relationship with nature, which he will actually shift to like a Hegelian interpretation of things as such. But like this backdrop and his historicism and this historical development very much makes me think of like this. It's almost like historicism embedded in dialectical understanding of things. And so the historicism is kind of like our sheet in which we inhabit right now. But the meaning that it inhabits is this dialectical process of history and how things have progressed to where we are right now. And so this creates, again, this different rationality referred to above, where assemblages of human and non-humans occur actually not ever differentiated from each other. They are abstractions, not separate things. So in this sense of the term, technicity is obscured. And so Simondon's notion of progress through concretization is this technicity. And so when we embrace it and it becomes obscured, that's obviously a problem for things. And so he explains how, according to like Aristotelian metaphysics, about like the historical, not the historical, but like the identification of something as such, kind of shifts to this like Hegelian interpretation, which is very vague and consists of abstractions from a whole, which is like the thing behind the thing behind the thing, which is like what's really going on. The backdrop, I guess, is we could call it the spirit for anybody who's been in that Hegel class. So then we go through determinism, which I already kind of touched on. I'm running long, so I'm going to keep moving forward. Through that into like the politics. And so the politics of this is hopeful, because constructivism views technology, quote, through the lens of social relevance and involvement. So what happens is we are able to re-engage with facts and values rather than them standing separate from each other. They're able to be reunited, or at least not in opposition to each other, under the technological organization of society around certain artifacts, at least in practice, which bridges the divide put forth in conflicting theory and practice, a divided practice. So the example that he gives in the book is like, think about how a catalytic converter satiates the demand for cleaner air. So it's like these demands that people have within this social fabric that we inhabit. We ask for things and we develop things that now gather us around certain artifacts that are expressions of us, in a sense. And so the new politics becomes about embracing technology and embracing this new rationality and concretization in order to gather around these artifacts that perpetuate social and democratic progress. This is a very, very hopeful chapter. I guess I forget if I'm supposed to leave you guys with a question or not, but if anything, my question is, this is like very, very optimistic to me. I'm just curious to hear about whether you guys think it's very optimistic or what's going on. Thank you. Stay healthy.